Sweating, Brock murmured to himself. This is looking bad. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX square-shaped laboratory room with high ceilings and large glass tanks set into the floor in the farthest corners of the room. There were also cages for Pokémon to be kept in, but unlike the other rooms they had been in on the second floor, the ones in this particular room were all empty. After arriving on the third level of Team Rocket's underground base, Misty and Giselle had immediately started looking for Ash, finding in the process yet another trail of badly bruised, unconscious Rocket grunts and their fallen Pokémon. The third floor itself hadn't been all that terribly different from the previous one. While the first level had been mostly offices and the second had been labs, the third level had thus far been a mix of containment rooms full of caged Pokémon, lab rooms for whatever wicked experiments Team Rocket liked to conduct, and offices which were most likely where the organization's scientists had been storing their research. Along the way, both girls had come across several of the aforementioned scientists that Ash had apparently cowed on his way through originally, due mostly to the fact that they found them huddling in small corners in offices, hiding behind desks and yelling surrender from the floor whenever Misty and Giselle came across them. In their search for Ash, the two young girls had found themselves standing inside the prior-mentioned large laboratory, their frustrations mounting due to not being able to find a way to the fourth and final level. However, their luck seemed to be on the verge of changing since, after looking for what felt like forever for a way to the next level, they saw a door at the far end of the lab which looked like it had a sign next to it signifying stairs. Just as the disguised brunette and redhead were about to make their way to the door, however, a sultry feminine chuckle suddenly filled the room. Stopping immediately, they looked towards the shadows near the door they needed to go through and saw a beautiful blonde woman dressed in a skimpy Team Rocket uniform. Recognizing the woman instantly as the same Rocket admin Ash had faced back on the Anne, Misty and Giselle took a step back as the sensual woman stopped and put her hands on her hips while smirking. You must be two of the intruders who have been causing a real stir down here. I don't know who you are, little girls, or how you got down here, but this is as far as you go. We can't have nosy trainers poking around down here after all. Misty, ever the one to stir up trouble, retorted back. Why don't you just let us through, you ugly old dolled up excuse for a Smeargle's painting? The blonde's left eye twitched at Misty's comment as she bit back harshly. Her sensual and sexy demeanor now vanished entirely. You wanna repeat that, you rude, nasty little hussy? No one insults my gorgeous looks and gets away with it. The woman, known as Elenia but not to Misty and Giselle, smirked smugly. It may be my job to take down rotten intruders such as yourself, but crushing two ugly little future spinsters will be an added bonus for me. With a flourish of her hands and a flip of her hair, the stunning young woman crossed her arms in front of her and then threw two Pokeballs in the air with an outward flip of her hands. Vileplume, Vaporeon, take the spotlight, my beautiful Pokémon. As the female Rocket admin's Pokémon appeared in two bright blue flashes of light and announced their names to the world, Giselle gritted her teeth and looked over at Misty. No words were shared, but they were both thinking the same thing. They had seen these Pokémon before in action against Ash, so they knew they would be tough to defeat. Well, it looks like we're going to have to work together again, Hilda. Misty asked, more stated, with a smirk as she called her friend by her current pseudonym. Looking over at the other girl, Giselle nodded and smiled back. Looks like we will. Leaf. Elenia quirked a perfectly groomed eyebrow and then laughed. Really? Hilda. Leaf. Oh, you poor dears, what happened? Did your parents run out of good names when they had you? Ha. Just you watch, you slutty looking plastic doll. Misty clipped back. We'll wipe that smile off that fake face of yours and send it back to the plastic surgeon who put it on you. Together, Giselle and Misty both selected their own Pokémon and, in tandem, released them with a synchronized call of Marowak, Starmie. Come on. Pathetic Pokémon for two pathetic little girls. Elenia jeered. No matter, they all fall just the same. Vileplume and Vaporeon, work your magic, my glorious babies. Before Giselle and Misty could react or give commands of their own, both Vileplume and Vaporeon launched two powerful attacks in the form of a petal dance and hydro pump. Luckily, Marowak thought fast on its feet and quickly hopped towards Starmie, flipping it away from the incoming attacks with its bone and then leaping away in the opposite direction to avoid them as well. Thanks for that, Giselle, your Marowak really saved us. Misty looked over at her friend and thanked. No problem, but let's focus on the battle, look here they come again. The brunette shouted while pointing ahead at Vaporeon, whom was now charging towards Marowak in a rocketing tube of water that was Aqua Jet. At the same time, Vileplume sent out a flurry of razor-sharp leaves using Razor Leaf at Starmie. In tandem, both girls took action. Marowak jumped in front of those leaves and knocked them away for Starmie. Giselle commanded, just as Misty did the same for the other girl. Starmie used Swift and Rapid Spin together to stop Vaporeon. Together, the two Pokémon worked as one to defend the other, with Marowak jumping in front of Starmie and using his bone club like a spinning shield to deflect all of the leaves that came their way. At the same time, Starmie jumped up and used a combination of Swift and Rapid Spin to send a stream of speed-enhanced golden stars at the incoming Vaporeon. Elenia was obviously not thrown off though, as she simply commanded, Vaporeon change course, up in the air now. The water type began just before it redirected itself and launched its water-clad body high into the air. Porin. Due to their enemy now barreling down at them like a watery meteor, Marowak and Starmie had to jump away from each other to avoid it, but that was part of Elenia's plan as she quickly ordered Vileplume to use another petal dance just before the other two Pokémon leapt away. Not even being able to touch their feet to solid ground yet, Misty and Giselle's Pokémon were only able to look towards the incoming attack just before it struck both of them, eliciting a cry of pain from them as they were sent careening back across the lab. Marowak, Starmie. Both girls yelled in concern for their Pokémon as they hit the ground with a rough-sounding thud and grunted in pain again. Vaporeon Hydro Pump. Elenia commanded once more, leading her quadrupedal water Pokémon to call out its name again just before unleashing a powerful torrent of water, right at Marowak. Marowak, move. Giselle ordered fretfully. Unfortunately though, the ground type was still getting back to his feet, and because of that, he was unable to defend himself properly. However, just before the blast of water could strike an extremely effective blow, Starmie jumped in front of its partner and rooted its spiked legs into the ground as it took the full brunt of the hydro pump head-on. Giselle was obviously surprised at this, but she wasn't about to let an opportunity go to waste, especially not with Starmie struggling to stand against the powerful jet of water. Ash's quick thinking having rubbed off on her, Giselle called out, Marowak, use Bonemerang on Vaporeon. The skull-capped Pokémon took a firm grip on his bone club and then reared back before tossing it up and around the torrent of water being blasted at Starmie. Vaporeon's concentration was focused on its attack, so it didn't see the bone club spiraling at it until it was already smashing into the water type's head hard enough to make it cry out and stumble back, the hydro pump stopping instantly. Starmie used Swift to back that attack up. Misty ordered of her Pokémon, who had managed to shake off the drenching it took and then shook itself quickly again before sending a spray of stars at Vaporeon. Elenia ordered her Vileplume to jump in and assist its partner, but just before the grass type could move, the same bone club that Marowak had used to hit Vaporeon came circling back around and whacked Vileplume from behind, knocking the grass Pokémon off its feet into the ground. Vileplume. It grunted painfully just as the flurry of Swift struck Vaporeon and washed over the evolved form of Eevee, overwhelming it and cascading over Elenia's Pokémon as it flew back and rolled across the ground. With the momentum shifted in the battle, Misty and Giselle both took advantage of it and commanded together, Marowak, Starmie. Use Bone Rush Bubble Beam. Marowak's Bone Club, now in its hand again, elongated and glowed white while Starmie shot a spray of large bubbles at both downed Pokémon. At the same time, Marowak took off running at them with his bone club trailing beside him like a sword. Elenia, for her part, didn't look overly concerned as she simply pointed and spoke, Vaporeon use Haze, Vileplume use Sweet Scent. The water type moved to its feet quickly and opened its mouth before expelling a thick, dark haze of smoke into the air, which quickly suffused the atmosphere around them and obscured Elenia's Pokémon from view. The bubbles Misty had Starmie send out were swallowed up inside of the hazy cloud with no way to know whether or not they had hit their target. Giselle was quick on the take though and ordered Marowak to stop his charge just before he could get lost inside of the smoke cloud. As the ground type hopped back to join Starmie, both they and their trainers looked on as the smoke cloud in front of them expanded and kept growing until it soon obscured Elenia's entire side of the lab. What was even worse though was that a strange yellowish dust could be seen surrounding the hazy cloud, and before either Misty or Giselle knew it, both of their Pokémon had also become lost inside of it as well. Staring down the wall of black smoke glowing with yellow powder, Misty gritted her teeth and narrowed her eyes. "This is gonna suck." Giselle simply nodded in agreement as a bead of sweat dropped down the side of her temple. No. No. Please no Ack. Came the panicked pleading of a rocket grunt just before a razor flurry of leaves struck he and his wobbling Raticate and sent them flying back across the hall they were standing in. As the rocket grunt landed in a heap amongst the other black uniforms of his teammates, which were now cluttering the hallway of the 4th level of the Team Rocket base, Ash stepped forward with a menacing aura surrounding his disguised form. In front of him were all the Pokémon he had with him at present: Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle and Roselia. All 4 Pokémon were covered in very light scratches and scuff marks, but for the most part, even after battling through what seemed like legions of rocket grunts from the 2nd floor on, none of them seemed worse for the wear. If anything, all 4 of them appeared to carry the same vicious, intense demeanor as their trainer. Even Charmander, who approached a twitching rocket grunt with flames burning at the corners of his mouth. Just before he could attack the grunt, however, Ash called out sternly, "No Charmander, enough." His stern command was enough to make the fire type stop and look back at his trainer as Ash approached the downed group of grunts and looked down at them with disgust in his eyes. "They may be vile pieces of trash, but we aren't killers like they are." Charmander looked at the grunt again and growled once more, causing Ash to narrow his gaze at his Pokémon due to the noticeable shift in demeanor he had noticed in the fire type lately. Though, the young man was nothing if not a trainer that demanded obedience and respect for the equal amount of it that he gave to his Pokémon in return, and he made it known. "Charmander. I said enough." The fire lizard looked back at him again, leading Ash to kneel down to his level and sigh with great sadness in his eyes. "Listen. I know how you feel right now, all of you." He looked amongst his other Pokémon as well. "The things we've seen down here, it makes me hate Team Rocket just as much as you do. But we aren't them. We don't kill." Reaching out, he laid a comforting hand on Charmander's head. "I need you and your strength, Charmander. Don't lost control of yourself now, okay? Please buddy, I need you." Hearing those words, Charmander looked down and nodded, apologetically murmuring to his trainer, who merely smiled and rubbed his head again before standing up. "Alright guys, come on, let's keep going and see if we can find any more Pokémon. The more we find, the bigger list we have to give the police once we're done down here." With that spoken, the black-haired trainer and his 4 Pokémon left the hallway littered with unconscious grunts, and as soon as they rounded the next corner, they stopped mid-step upon seeing a man standing halfway through the hall. As soon as Ash saw the man and the distinctive Team Rocket poncho-like shirt he wore, as well as the unique silver hair he possessed, which was slicked at the sides but spiked at the top, he knew instantly who he was. His mind flashing back to the battle he had against a Team Rocket admin in MT Moon months before, whose name he recalled was Zetson. Ash narrowed his eyes. He also recognized the admin as being the same battle director who beat the young boy back on the battle stage upstairs. Although, it was obvious the rocket admin in question didn't recognize Ash due to the illusionary disguise Ghastly had erected over him, and the suspicion was proven by the lazy-looking man sighing. "So you're the one causing all these problems for us down here, huh? Man." Zetson put a hand to his head. "I don't know what it is about goody-goody upstarts getting involved in our affairs these days. First those snot-nosed kids and now you." Ash remained silent, Something Zetsun picked up on as he snorted and put a hand on his hip. Not the talkative type, huh? Fine, whatever. He sighed again. All I gotta do is take you down and then I can go take a break and play craps or something upstairs. The disenchanted admin finished in a grumble. Arceus willing, I don't gotta run that stupid battle stage again. The rocket admin then withdrew 4 Pokeballs from within his poncho and held them out in a bored fashion. Come on you guys, let's get this over with. In a bright flash of light, 4 Pokemon appeared in the hallway. 3 of which Ash recognized as the same Arbok, Sandslash and Golbat he had battled against in MT. Moon with his then Spearow and 2 Nidoran. The 4th Pokemon was new, a Machoke that Ash had quite frankly seen bigger of at the fighting dojo in Saffron. Although, seeing the Golbat up close gave him all the proof he needed that the man before him had definitely indeed been the masked person he had seen battle against and take the young trainer's other Golbat upstairs in the battle stage room. Still, Ash's false persona, Red, remained silent, even as Zetsun commanded his Pokemon. Arbok used Venoshock, Golbat Air Slash, Sandslash Mud Shot, Machoke Karate Chop. As soon as the 4 rocket Pokemon in question commenced their attacks, Ash's own went into action with the behest of their trainer. Charmander used a powerful flamethrower to counter Arbok's Venoshock, Squirtle used Water Pulse to disrupt Sandslash's Mud Shot, Roselia utilized a flurry of razor-sharp petals to counter Golbat's Air Slash, and Bulbasaur made intelligent use of his vines to grab Machoke by the legs and flip the fighting type up and onto the ground on its backside. Zetsun scowled and grunted in frustration. Can't you just make this easy on me? Darn it, Golbat use Mean Look, Arbok Poison Sting and Sandslash use Rock Tomb. This time, Ash did react. Charmander used Smokescreen. His fire type acted fast and expelled a black haze cloud of smoke into the air, effectively canceling out Golbat's paralyzing Mean Look as the hazy cloud filled the hallway. Arbok's Poison Sting harmlessly hit the floor inside of the smoke cloud, missing Roselia by several inches, but Sandslash's materialized giant boulders were a little harder to evade. The first rock to land inside of the smoke cloud Squirtle was able to jump back away from, while the second one Charmander rolled underneath just as it descended down upon him from the blackness above. Luckily for Ash's team, they were used to fighting without vision and relying on their senses due to the smokescreen and blindfold training he routinely had all of his Pokemon practice. Because of this, Bulbasaur was able to sense where the third and final boulder was coming from just before it hit. By sensing its trajectory coming down through the air at just the right time, the grass type was able to wrap his vines around it and then, with a hard circular swing with his torso, made possible by the intense strength training he did routinely, managed to fling the boulder back out of the smoke cloud and directly at Machoke. Seeing this, Zetsun cursed and commanded, Machoke use Dynamic Punch and break that boulder. From the other side of the smoke cloud, Ash smirked upon hearing the rocket admin's command, and that was why, in rapid succession, he yelled. Squirtle use Rapid Spin Water Pulse, Charmander Flamethrower, Bulbasaur use your vines to make a whirlwind, and Roselia use Magical Leaf. Just as Machoke smashed the boulder into pieces that had been about to hit it, a flurry of attacks came erupting from the smoke cloud. The first was a powerful, hot blast of fire that headed straight for Golbat, while the second was a glowing, multicolored cascade of leaves that was on a collision course with Machoke. The following 2 attacks came from Squirtle and Bulbasaur. The former came spinning out of the smoke cloud with multiple jets of pulsing water shooting for Sandslash, while Bulbasaur himself started to spin his vines in a fast circle. This caused a strong wind current to kick up, which sent the hazy cloud moving towards Zetsun's Pokemon. Due to all of the rocket admin's Pokemon cringing away from the shards of the boulder Machoke had smashed, none of them were able to move in time, and thus, each one took the full brunt of the attacks that had been meant for them. Unfortunately for Zetsun, he was unable to see the extent of damage done to his Pokemon due to the smoke cloud which had passed from Ash's side of the hallway to his. Even still, the inherently lazy commander shouted, not knowing whether or not the Pokemon he was calling for was still active or not. Sandslash use Sandstorm and blow that smoke cloud away. His hopes paid off because, like a bomb being set off in the desert, a large gust of sand suddenly erupted out of the smoke cloud, dissipating it in the process and leaving behind a large, swirling cloud of funneling sand in its wake. Zetsun allowed a smirk to take his features as he clenched his fist. Time for a little payback. Now Golbat used supersonic. Out of the sand cloud came the confusion-inducing rings of supersonic, which caught the now exposed Roselia off guard and pulled her under the sway of confusion as her eyes became swirly. At the same time, Ash heard Zetsun command his Arbok to use Dig, which was then followed up by several globs of poison coming from the sand cloud by an unknown source. Bulbasaur, get Roselia out of the way with your vines. He ordered one of his two grass types. Charmander and Squirtle fight back those globs of poison with Bubble Beam and Fire Spin. While Bulbasaur made haste and used his vines to grab the confused Roselia and pull her away from the incoming poisonous projectiles, Squirtle and Charmander worked in tandem with their attacks to neutralize them. However, it proved to be a ruse because, seconds later, Arbok came exploding out of a hole in the hallway floor while shooting off the poisonous barbs of poison sting at Bulbasaur. Squirtle took fast action and jumped in front of his teammate, but Arbok simply grabbed a hold of him by the shell with bite and then raised up in the air as the serpent's powerful jaws started to put the squeeze on Squirtle. Further adding to the chaos was Machoke soon appearing from the hole Arbok had tunneled as well, its muscular body glowing with a combination of both focus energy and rage, which it turned on Charmander and started pummeling the smaller Pokémon mercilessly with. To make matters even worse still, Ash heard Zetsun yell for Golbat to use Venoshock from within the sand cloud again, followed by the command of Sandslash to use Earthquake. As the entire hall started to tremble and shake violently, making poor Roselia's stumbling confusion even worse, Ash took stock of the situation and knew they were in dire straits. Squirtle was still in the mouth of Arbok, who could easily turn the hold it had on the turtle Pokémon from a mere bite to a poison fang at any time, and Charmander was getting viciously assaulted by an enraged Machoke. Worse still, Bulbasaur was struggling to stay on his feet due to Sandslash's Earthquake, and that made him a prime target for Golbat's Venoshock, which was just now closing in on him from out of the sandstorm. As if time seemed to slow down for Ash whenever he was battling and in a desperate situation, his brain appeared to break down and calculate each individual scenario in a rapid span of time, all while his mind processed all the different ways he could get out of the current situation. Then, just before the tables could turn all but permanently against his Pokémon, Ash's gaze went to his stumbling, swirly-eyed Roselia, and at that very moment, inspiration struck. Time still seeming to have slowed down for him, Ash called out, "Roselia, use Magical Leaf and Stun Spore." Even though she was badly confused and still stumbling on her feet due to the shaking of Sandslash's small earthquake attack, Roselia still heard her trainer and raised her petaled hands. Then, in a wild and uncontrolled manner, dozens of glowing, sharpened leaves erupted from her petals and started volleying all over the hallway. At that same time, Ash made another quick command. "Squirtle, withdraw into your shell. Bulbasaur, get to Charmander and make a leech cage over yourselves." Bulbasaur turned to find his fire-type teammate while Squirtle withdrew inside of his shell inside of Arbok's mouth. At this time, both of Zetsun's Pokémon outside of the sand cloud, Machoke and Arbok, were in a state of confusion due to the chaos that Earthquake and now Roselia's wild release of Magical Leaf had caused. Machoke was just now regaining its footing from the prior earth-shaking, and now, both the fighting type and Arbok were trying to dodge and avoid the dozens of razor-sharp leaves bouncing off the walls. Bulbasaur had been luckily spared the worst of Golbat's Venoshock by the aid of some of Roselia's leaves meeting some of the globs in midair and adding weight to them, which caused them to drop to the ground. But the few that had continued on towards him, the grass type was luckily agile enough from his training, and stable on his feet again, to jump and roll away from the few poisonous globs that instead simply splat the ground harmlessly. Using the momentum from his evasion, Bulbasaur ran at Machoke and got it away from Charmander by ramming the distracted fighting type in the gut with Headbutt, which not only succeeded in knocking Machoke away from Charmander but also pushed it right into the path of several of the rebounding leaves. A nasty side effect that had Machoke crying out in pain as the leaves sliced into its muscular skin. As soon as they were clear, Bulbasaur turned to the panting Charmander and shot a seed out of his bulb and onto the ground between them. This caused the tangled vines of leech seed to sprout up around both Charmander and Bulbasaur and encase them in a cage of vine and leaves. Luckily though, due to Ash training him for strategies just like this one, Bulbasaur had learned how to neutralize the energy sapping effects of the technique. Which he did as soon as the cage formed around them by using his teeth to snip one single vine in the cage's lower base, severing the energy-draining connection and leaving only a tangled shrub of vines behind to surround Bulbasaur and Charmander. The timing couldn't have been more perfect because at that moment, Roselia spun unsteadily around on her feet and as she spun, she performed the second attack Ash commanded her. Which was taking place now as she released a large cloud of stun spore into the tight, cramped space of the hallway. As soon as the yellowish-orange cloud of paralyzing toxins filled the air, Ash called out again, "Bulbasaur, Charmander, hold your breath." He couldn't see them but his two Pokémon did as he commanded from within their viney cage while Squirtle, still in Arbok's mouth, had long since retreated safely into his shell. Unfortunately for the two Pokémon of Zetsons that wasn't in the sand cloud, Machoke and Arbok were not only afflicted by the remaining leaves that were still rebounding off the walls and cutting into their skin but they also became trapped by the paralyzing toxin of stun spore. Zetson, who couldn't see through the sandstorm his Sandslash had made, was unable to help either of his Pokémon and this led to both Arbok and Machoke taking the full blast of stun spore. Ash, on the other hand, could see and he smirked as he saw it, giving another series of commands as his strategy started to broaden and take clear effect in his mind's eye. Squirtle use Water Pulse and Bulbasaur, use Leech Seed on Machoke and Arbok. From inside of the large snake's mouth, Squirtle unleashed a large, powerful blast of water straight down Arbok's throat, the paralyzed Pokémon's already slack jaw muscles loosening completely and allowing Squirtle to launch himself out of his opponent's mouth. Arbok was still reeling back from the water pulse that had been shot down its throat and Squirtle, after popping out of his shell in midair, used yet another which slammed right into the side of the poison type's head and sent it careening into the ground. As all of this happened, Charmander slashed himself and Bulbasaur free of their protective vine cage, both of them having been spared the effects of Roselia's stun spore by a combination of leech cage and breath holding, and allowed Bulbasaur to jump out in front of him. Not wasting any time, the Kanto grass-type starter shot two leech seeds at Machoke and Arbok. Zetson's two Pokémon were paralyzed by stun spore and thus, it made them vulnerable targets as the small pods attached themselves to their bodies and started to sap their energy with electrostatic shocks of electricity. Squirtle use Water Gun on Roselia and snap her out of her confusion. Ash commanded, his water type doing as told and using a low-power water gun to splash Roselia in the face, thereby shaking her out of her stupor. With Roselia back to normal, Ash called out again. Now Bulbasaur, Roselia. Use Ingrain and connect it from Machoke and Arbok to Squirtle and Charmander. The two small grass types worked together in tandem and used Ingrain, making the roots of the energy-sapping attack connect from Zetson's two leech seed-stricken Pokémon, back to Charmander and Squirtle, whom had sustained the worst damage so far. Thankfully, due to Leech Seed, the amount of energy Ash's two Pokémon received via the roots of Ingrain now at their feet was close to double than it would have otherwise been by itself. With Charmander and Squirtle now appearing visibly restored and recharged, Ash yelled out. Now, Squirtle use Aqua Jet on Machoke and Charmander, use Flamethrower on Arbok. Together, side by side, the type-opposite partners charged their attacks by Squirtle becoming surrounded by a veil of water and Charmander building up a hot ball of flames in his mouth. Then, in an impressive display of total synchronization, Squirtle shot off the ground at Machoke while Charmander unleashed his ferocious torrent of flames at Arbok. Both attacks hit their marks dead on point with Machoke getting flung off its feet by Aqua Jet and Arbok being jettisoned back across the hall by the sheer force of Charmander's flamethrower. Both of the enemy's Pokémon went careening back into the sand cloud on Zetson's side of the hall, leading the rocket admin to call out blindly. What's going on out there? Machoke, Arbok, answer me. In the confusion, Ash took another decisive gain in the battle and commanded. Charmander. Use rage to increase the power of your fire spin and unleash it at that sand cloud. Char. The little fire type growled viciously as his eyes burned hot with anger and his body began glowing with an orange-like aura of raw power. Then, opening his maw once more, Ash's Pokémon sent out a red-hot torrent of spiraling flames straight at the sandstorm cloud, keeping all four of Zetsun's Pokémon hidden from view. Unable to see through the cover he had made, Zetsun's eyes widened as Sandslash's sand cloud erupted and then exploded in a vortex of pure heat due to Charmander's fire spin surrounding the cloud and trapping it, as well as the Pokémon inside, within its red-hot walls of hellfire. Seeing their moment arriving at the apex of his strategy, Ash yelled out one more time. All of you now. Squirtle use Water Pulse, Bulbasaur use Razor Leaf, Roselia Leaf Storm and Charmander. He raised his fist high. Use Dragon Rage. Bulba, Squirtle, Roselia AAAA. Came screaming from the lips of the former three Pokémon as they launched their attacks at the spinning wall of flames entrapping Zetsun's Pokémon. Charmander, from the middle of the group, held his paws into fists in front of him as the center of his belly glowed like a bright light. Then, looking up as power shone in his eyes, he opened his mouth for the third time and released a powerful, bright blue beam of pure draconic energy, which rocketed alongside the other three attacks and sailed straight into the fire vortex. The explosion that followed was so powerful, even the guests high above in the casino felt a small shaking at their tables, though it was nothing compared to Ground Zero. Down in the hallway of the fourth level of Team Rocket's hidden base, smoke and a powerful windstorm filled the enclosed space and almost rocked Ash and his Pokémon off their feet. For what felt like an eternity, the five of them stood stock still with their faces down to shield themselves from the blowback of the final attacks. Finally, as the smoke cleared and the chaos receded, Ash looked out in front of him and found the hallway stretching ahead to be all but gutted right down to the insulation and support beams. What was more, where Zetsun's Pokémon had been was now a large crater in the tile floor. A crater in which Arbok, Sandslash, Golbat and Machoke were laying heaped atop one another inside of, not even a twitch of consciousness to be seen among them. The final blast had apparently been so powerful, even Zetsun had been knocked off his feet and into the wall at the end of the hallway behind him. His uniform was torn and scratched up and the silver-haired man had his face firmly planted in the ground. And just like his Pokémon, he didn't so much as stir. Breathing a sigh of relief at the end of the intense battle, Ash smiled down at his victorious Pokémon and cheered them on. You guys fought an awesome battle, great all four of you. Seriously, I'm so proud. The time for celebration though wasn't at the present moment and Ash knew that, which was why he focused on the current situation and became serious again. You guys did great but we have to keep moving. I'm sure a lot of people heard that and if we don't get going now, we might get ambushed by a ton of rockets. Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle nodded in affirmative, all three of them still looking ready for battle and on the alert. Roselia though, for her part, nodded tiredly at Ash. Her willpower had her ready to keep pushing on but due to all the non-stop battling she had done, her exhaustion was evident. Ash could see this, which was why he smiled comfortingly at her and pulled out her Pokeball. You did an incredible job girl, really, but I want you to take a rest now alright. You won't be much use right now if you're tired and get taken off guard. I promise if I need you I'll let you back out, you have my word. Roselia looked like she wanted to argue but she couldn't deny that what her trainer said was indeed true. That was why, with a relenting, Celia, she allowed him to return her to her Pokeball. Looking at his remaining three Pokémon afterwards, Ash nodded and smiled. Come on you three, let's keep moving. Bulba, Squirt, Char. Came the triumvirate chorus call as Ash jumped over the unconscious forms of Zetsun's Pokémon and they followed suit. Squirtle even made sure to step on the unconscious Rocket admin's head himself as he and the other two followed their trainer around the corner and onward to the next battle that surely awaited them in their quest to liberate the captured base Pokémon. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX and even Elenia looked down at the floor where they heard and even felt a powerful explosion erupt from somewhere on the fourth level. Elenia definitely felt and heard it, and for a moment, her eyes narrowed as she thought to herself. I don't know what's going on down there, but I need to take out these little girls now so I can go see what's happening. She then looked through the large haze that her Vaporeon had billowed up around the lab, cutting off her view of Misty and Giselle and their Pokémon. These two must not be alone, and whoever they're with is getting too close to Giovanni for comfort. With that thought in mind, she quickly gave command to her Pokémon. Vaporeon, get into that smoke cloud and use quick attack with Aurora Beam. Vileplume, I want you to use Giga Drain. Misty heard that list of commands over across the lab and widened her stance while sweating. Yeah, I heard, but focus on the now or we're gonna get pummeled. Giselle looked into the smoke cloud as well and nodded. Right. Marowak, I need you to get out of there now, you can't see anything. You too, Starmie, hurry. Misty encouraged her own Pokémon. Though unfortunately, neither of them heeded their trainer's words. In fact, they didn't make any sound whatsoever inside of the hazy barrier. What's wrong? Can't you two hear us? Giselle yelled out, only to have Misty's eyes narrow in thought just before widening as she looked over at the other girl. Don't you remember? She had her Vileplume use Sweet Scent right when Vaporeon used Haze. Giselle's own eyes widened as well. That means. She gasped and looked ahead. Oh no. Sweet Scent numbs a Pokemon's senses and instincts in battle. They can probably hear us but just not move properly. HM. They heard Elenia's sultry laughter float over to them as the blonde rocket admin spoke in a demeaningly amused voice. Now you're catching on. But unfortunately, you're both too late. At that very same moment, Vileplume and Vaporeon jumped into the haze cloud and began their attack onslaught. The water-type evolution of Eevee took off, running around the smoky interior of the haze while using her keen, trained vision for this very type of battle strategy to keep tabs on where Vileplume was. On the flip side, the grass type had learned to distinguish where Vaporeon was at by the unique perfume Elenia used on it, being that it was her favorite Pokémon. Due to this, they were a deadly tag team while fighting blind opponents, and all Marowak and Starmie could do was listen to the sound of movement around them, though even then it didn't matter. Sweet Scent had taken strong hold of Giselle's male Pokémon, and even Starmie was affected, rendering both Pokémon essentially useless as they just stumbled around dumbly in the hazy cloud, completely unaware of their surroundings. This made Marowak a sitting duck as Vaporeon's Aurora Beam struck him dead center, knocking the ground type off his feet and back onto the ground several feet away from Starmie with a painful sounding smack. Misty's Pokémon, meanwhile, was captured up in the tendrils of Vileplume's Giga Drain and was currently suspended up in the air as the grass type absorbed large amounts of energy from it by the seconds. As if that wasn't enough, Vaporeon continued to simply play with Marowak as it sped in and out with quick attack, bashing the bone-wielding Pokémon back and forth across the floor while still using Aurora Beam for double the damage. Outside of the scene of carnage, Misty and Giselle looked both nervous and desperate. I don't know what to do. Giselle fretted before thinking to herself. This is just like when Ash battled against her on the Saint. Anne and she used Mist on him. How can we fight against opponents we can't see when we can't even see our own Pokémon? Misty was racking her brain for the answer as well, and as she did so, the Oranguette just happened to glance up towards the ceiling. And when she did, inspiration struck her in the most Ash-like way. Training her eyes on the ventilation panels up in the ceiling, specifically the main, largest one almost directly above the smoke cloud itself, which also had a manual turn-on switch on the side for emergency situations or inspections, all of her training with Ash seemed to pay off right then and there. Hilda. She called out the fake pseudonym of her partner. I'm going to have Starmie use water gun as much as it can in. She strained her ears to hear where it sounded like Vaporeon was beating up on Marowak. In the leftward direction. I need you to tell Marowak to beat its club on the ground and make a lot of noise. Why? The slightly older girl called back to the currently brunette-haired, sun hat-wearing, disguised Misty. Just trust me. Do it. She yelled back. Not understanding but deciding to trust Misty, Giselle did as requested. Marowak. If you can hear me. Beat your club on the ground as loud as you can. Inside of the hazy dome, Marowak was able to clearly hear his trainer, which was the one and only good thing about getting beaten around like a rag doll. Vaporeon's near-relentless attacks had cleared the ground type's mind enough from sweet scent that he was now able to move more freely of his own will. With that being the case, Marowak raised his bone club in the air during one of the periods of time that Vaporeon wasn't coming in for an attack. Then, like a drummer, he began banging his club on the ground, over and over again. Audibly hearing the clacking sound of bone hitting ground, Misty then yelled. Starmie. If you can hear me and do it, I need you to use Swift right where you hear that banging coming from. Luckily, much like with Marowak, Starmie getting attacked by Vileplume's Giga Drain had cleared its head enough from sweet scent that it was able to focus on Misty's voice and the command she gave. Even through the pain of getting shocked by the energy-sucking tendrils of the draining attack, Starmie listened for the clacking sound, and as soon it locked on to where the water type thought it was coming from, it mustered all the willpower it had and then launched a flurry of golden star-shaped discs in that same direction. Acting as quick as she could, Misty yelled to Giselle. Have Marowak listen for the incoming swift attack and then have it jump just before it thinks the attack is going to hit. After that, have Marowak toss its bone club as high up in the air as it can, straight above it towards the air vent lever in the ceiling. Giselle nodded and ordered her Pokémon to do just as Misty instructed, the whole exchange only taking a few seconds. Inside the smoke cloud, Marowak heard both Misty and Giselle's instructions, leading him to stop and listen intently for the incoming stars of Swift. Unfortunately, at the same time, Vaporeon was charging another Aurora Beam, which it fired at Marowak as well. Straining his ears within his sensitive skull cap, Giselle's Pokémon was able to lock onto the general incoming trajectory of both attacks. Then, taking a literal leap of faith, Marowak jumped up into the air as high as he could. The timing was just perfect because at that moment, both Swift and Aurora Beam hit the ground beneath where the ground Pokémon had been standing. The shockwave of both colliding attacks was enough to launch Marowak so high up in the air, he actually broke the hazy clouds cover high up near the ceiling. Remembering his orders, Marowak took aim with the few short seconds he had and then tossed his bone club right at the ventilation shaft, the projectile slamming straight into the large lever jutting out of the machine's side dead on and causing it to roar to life just as Marowak dropped back into the smoke cloud again. The effect was almost instantaneous. As soon as the powerful ventilation system cut on and began humming into operation, the fans within the vents started to pull all of the haze down below straight up into their grates, efficiently and quickly robbing Alania's Pokémon of the cover they had so enjoyed. What? Said Rocket Commander shouted in disbelief. No. Giselle cheered as Misty smirked. Oh yeah, worked like a charm. Getting serious, Giselle returned the favor. Let me help out now. Marowak used Bone Rush on Vaporeon. Having landed on his feet with his bone club dropping onto the ground next to him, Marowak looked to the side and was now able to see Vaporeon charging him again with quick attack. Moving fast, the ground type rolled to the side away from the charging water type and grabbed his club in the process. Then, raising up while the bone in his hands began to glow, Marowak swung it around and slammed the end of it straight across Vaporeon's cheek, stopping the water Pokémon dead in its tracks. Then, spinning around, Marowak smacked his opponent across the other side of its face before spinning a final time and jabbing the end into Vaporeon's chest, robbing it of all its air in one fell blow. To end the onslaught, Giselle yelled for him to use a fury attack-like flurry of strikes, which he promptly did, rapidly striking Alania's favorite Pokémon over and over again with his bone club and getting multiple cries of pain from it in the process. With a final smack to the side, Vaporeon went flying away on its side while Giselle called out again, now use Bonemerang and free Starmie. Ah! Vileplume, look out! The stunned Rocket admin yelled, though she was too late. Marowak tossed his club across the short distance separating him from Starmie and thwacked Vileplume right across the head with it. This caused her to cry out in pain and drop back, thereby freeing Starmie from Giga Drain's clutches. Thanks. Misty thanked Giselle. Now it's our turn. Starmie used Rapid Spin combined with Swift for some payback on Vileplume. Star. The water type grunted as it spun away from Vileplume but then came spinning back around and slammed itself into the now off-balance Pokémon, eliciting a cry of pain from it which grew as Starmie started bathing it in a painful shower of swift energy stars. As Vileplume flew back and landed on the ground, Starmie spun over to Marowak and stopped beside of it. Misty then called out, "Good job. Now use Recover and then Confuse Ray on both of them." Starmie raised itself up and started to glow as it restored itself mostly back to full health again. Right on the heels of that, the gem in its center then glowed ominously before several large rings of purple, confusion-inducing ghostly energy started floating towards the down and struggling Vaporeon and Vileplume. At this point, Elenia started to feel panic as she shouted in a shrill tone, her normal sensual grace and sultry demeanor no longer present. "What are you two doing? Don't just lay there. Get up and move out of the way." Almost as if to assure that they wouldn't, Marowak tossed his bone club again using Bonemerang and hit both of their opponents over the heads again, knocking Vaporeon and Vileplume back for a loop once more as the rings of Confuse Ray descended upon them. Almost immediately, the female Rocket's two Pokémon became swirly-eyed and dizzy as they tried with great effort to stand back up on their feet. Smirking, Misty clenched her fists. "Let's end this." "With pleasure." Giselle chimed in as she pointed at their opponents. "Marowak, use Rage and combine it with your new move. Thrash." The ground type's eyes narrowed and a red aura of power surrounded him while his body bulked up ever so slightly. Then, with an impressive burst of speed as he choked up on his bone club, Giselle's Pokémon blurred forward with a shout of its name and then commenced to savagely beating both of Elenia's Pokémon into a pulp with swing after swing, strike after strike, of his bone club via Thrash. After beating on Vileplume and Vaporeon until they fell back to the ground again, their shaky legs having finally given out, Misty came in for the grand finale. "Here we go. Starmie, end this with your new move. Use Hydro Pump. Star." Came Starmie's vocal reply as it leaned forward and allowed a huge eruption of water to shoot out from one of the points on its legs and cascade towards Elenia's Pokémon. Not only did the powerful water blast crash into Vaporeon and Vileplume, but it also sent them flying back into the Rocket admin herself, the force being great enough to send them all flying back across the lab and into the far wall, which they hit with a loud, hard and painful slam and fell to the ground like a felled tree. Misty and Giselle stared down their shared opponent for several moments, but when neither Elenia nor her Pokémon made any attempt to get up, they both knew that they had finally won. "Yes." Giselle cheered. "Woo! We did it. We won. We actually beat her." Misty sighed and wiped some sweat from her illusionary persona's forehead. "That was a close one, no doubt about it." Giselle looked at the younger girl and smiled brightly. "Misty, that was incredible thinking earlier. You really saved us with that vent trick. If it wasn't for that, we probably would have lost." Misty smiled in return. "Yeah, but you and Marowak were really good too. If you wouldn't have been so in sync, I don't think we would have won either." Giselle knelt down and embraced her Pokémon as he walked back over to her. "Well, if it wouldn't have been for these two, we wouldn't have won at all. They deserve the credit. They did such an amazing job." "They sure did." Misty agreed as she also knelt down and embraced her Starmie lovingly. "But you know." She looked over at Giselle again, seriously. "We really need to get out of here and find Ash. This place is still crawling with rockets and that blast I felt under us earlier really has me nervous." The brunette nodded, her demeanor shifting to seriousness again as well. "You're right. And if Ash has encountered any of the other admins like we just did, he could need help." With that said, Hilda and Leaf returned their Pokémon to their balls and then made their way towards the door that Elenia had kept them from. Along the way, they didn't even spare a glance for the unconscious young woman or the Pokémon laying out cold with her. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX stared at the door at the end of the hallway that he and his Pokémon had finally come to after traversing the halls for a short time longer. Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle steeled themselves from behind him and followed after their trainer bravely as he opened the door and stepped inside. As soon as Ash entered the new room waiting for him, he found that it was rather large and spacious. The length of the room wasn't all that terribly much, but the width and height were a little above average, at least more so than some of the other rooms he had been in thus far. What really stole his attention though was the large desk at the far end of the room with two potted plants next to it and the Persian that was sitting directly in front of the desk. And of course, what also grabbed his focus was the dark brown-haired man in a black suit sitting behind the desk. As Ash laid eyes upon the mysterious individual, whose own dark orbs studied him carefully over clasped hands that rested under his chin, he got the feeling almost instantly that he was looking at someone very important. So, the man's voice was deep, smooth and yet, slightly rough. "You are one of the intruders that has caused chaos down here, are you?" The man lowered his hands and then stood up as he slowly walked around the desk. "Funny. I didn't expect you to actually make it this far." Ash stood his ground firm but didn't say anything, leading Giovanni to smirk and lean back against his expensive wooden desk. "You must have more wit than wisdom to break into a secret base controlled by the most powerful crime syndicate on the continent. The question is though, were you working alone, or with someone else?" The boss of Team Rocket gave a sardonically amused grunt. "I wouldn't imagine you are working with the police. Those fools know next to nothing about our methods of operation, and they certainly don't know enough about us to pull off such an infiltration." He tapped his foot on the ground. "So now the question still remains, who are you? And what could possibly be your motivation for performing such a moronically foolish task as breaking into this place? Though I must admit." He looked down and smirked again. "Watching four young trainers who appear no older than late teenagers deal with my agents and even my admins in such a way is faintly amusing." Before Ash could even contort his expression into one of thought, Giovanni took a small, black remote out of his pocket and pressed a button on it. "I suppose you're wondering how I knew. Well, just look behind you." Ash did so, slowly and hesitantly, and there he saw a large TV screen with several different images all playing on the same screen lower down from the ceiling above him. As he looked at the live images playing, Ash was surprised, though only faintly, to see that they were surveillance images of both the game lounge above, as well as the 4 floors of the rocket base below that he was in now. In the images he saw the patrons playing games, eating, gambling and even battling against each other on the battle stage high up on the surface. But in the images of the base, he was able to see all the destruction he and his friends had caused. He saw all the unconscious rocket grunts and their Pokémon that he and his own had left scattered in the hallways on the way to where he was presently. He saw the damage that all the battles had wreaked on the hallways, rooms and even labs he had battled in, as well the rooms full of captive Pokémon that he had found. He also saw captured images of the unconscious Zetsun he had just beaten, as well as the view of who he remembered as the female rocket admin he had fought on the Saint Anne, also laying unconscious in the same lab room he had passed through in order to get to the 4th floor. To Ash's surprise, he also saw who he knew to be Brock battling against the big, bearded rocket admin who had tried to kill them back on the Anne. From what he could tell, they were battling down on the 2nd floor in what appeared to be nothing more now than a ruined, catastrophic mess due to all the hallways, rooms and other structures that had been obliterated in the battle. To him, it essentially looked just like a big indoor, underground parking deck now, sporadically strewn with the unconscious forms of the very rocket grunts he had defeated on his way through the base. Only now, most of them all, including their partner Pokémon, were covered in thick layers of the debris that had been caused by Brock and Riken's battle. And unfortunately, from what he could see, Brock's Onyx was having an extremely hard time handling the powerhouse of a looking Raiden that they were currently battling against. He couldn't see Misty or Giselle, but he figured they had to have been the ones to defeat Elenia. Just as soon as it came down, the large screen slid back up into the ceiling as Giovanni stuffed his remote into the breast pocket that his Team Rocket emblem rested above. "Yes, I must say, you and your little fellow meddlers have really done a number on my men. Beating up on Zetsun and Elenia like that." Giovanni made a disapproving clicking noise with his tongue. "But, at least it looks like Riken is handling your friend with no issues." The leader of Team Rocket smiled evilly as Ash turned to face him again. But don't worry, he doesn't kill his enemies once he beats them, at least not slowly. Giovanni saw Ash's face contort slightly into an expression of disgust and anger, leading him to laugh again and raise his head up. Though I suppose you're probably wondering who I am by now, him. He then held his arms out and made a grand gesture towards himself. I am Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket, the most powerful organization in the world and soon to be rulers of this whole continent. Focusing on Ash again, he asked with a smirk. And what may I ask is your name, boy? I would like to know it so I can send a card to your family anonymously after I kill you. The brave young trainer never felt more thankful for Ghastly's disguise as he did at the current time, giving him more of a sense of courage and anonymity to say something as a reply about his identity without giving away who he really was. So, balling his hands into fists, Ash responded in the strong, firm voice of his alter ego. My name is Red. Giovanni cackled again. Is that all? Not much of a name really, but it will save time when they're writing it on your tombstone. If we leave a body behind for anyone to find, that is. Then, with his boastful dialogue finished, the rocket leader pulled out 3 Pokeballs from inside of his suit and spoke them forth from their confines. Come out, my minions, and make short work of these annoyances. Ash and his 3 Pokémon stood their ground firmly. Even as 3 very powerful Pokémon appeared in the room in the form of a Rhyhorn, Kangaskhan and Nidoqueen. Each one looking just as ill-tempered, mean and brutal as they did strong. However, in the face of such opponents, neither Ash nor his partners shrunk away. Instead, Ash waved his hand forward and called out. I'm gonna use my friends right here to take you down with Giovanni. Squirtle, Charmander and Bulbasaur all hopped forward then and called out their names in unison. Bulba. Squirtle. Char. The leader of Team Rocket snorted in a condescending manner. Really? Such pathetic, puny excuses for Pokémon if I've ever seen them. Very well, boy, do your best, but this will be over quickly. Instead of replying, Ash just pointed and gave a command. All of you attack. Razor Leaf, Water Pulse and Flamethrower, let's go. The 3 small starters all did as told and unleashed their attacks together at one time, though when they did, Giovanni gave no command to his Pokémon. Even when the attacks hit head-on and covered them in smoke, still nothing was heard. It was only after the smoke cleared and revealed all 3 opposing Pokémon still standing strong and tall, like nothing had happened, did Ash sweat to himself and think. Okay, obviously his Pokémon are extremely powerful, so I'm gonna have to play this smart and fast to avoid making Charmander, Squirtle and Bulbasaur go head-to-head with them. With that in mind, he called out again. Bulbasaur use Sleep Powder on Rhyhorn. Squirtle Bubble Beam on Nidoqueen and Charmander, use Dragon Rage on Kangaskhan. The 3 Kanto starters readied their attacks quickly and then launched them with fast, intense ferocity. Unfortunately, Giovanni appeared nonplussed as he simply commanded with a hand still in one of his pockets. Rhyhorn use Bulldoze. Kangaskhan use Endure and Nidoqueen Poison Sting. The rocket leader's 3 Pokémon executed the counters immediately and with precise accuracy. Rhyhorn tucking into a roll and speeding across the office floor like a steam truck while Kangaskhan glowed red and Nidoqueen sent forth several large, poisonous barbs from within its mouth. Bulbasaur's Sleep Powder was simply bowled right through by Rhyhorn's attack and Nidoqueen's poisonous barbs met Bubble Beam in midair and effectively neutralized them. Kangaskhan meanwhile simply stood its ground and allowed the draconic energy of Charmander's attack to hit it, utilizing the power of Endure to withstand the Dragon Rage with no issues. Rhyhorn continued on towards Bulbasaur and the grass type had to make use of his well-earned ability to jump out of the way of the dual-ground rock type to avoid getting plowed over by Bulldoze. However, Giovanni's Pokémon was also fast on its feet and it showed it by turning on the spot and barreling towards Bulbasaur again with another Bulldoze. At the same time, the dark-haired man called out for his 2 other Pokémon to use another attack. Nidoqueen use Earth Power on that Squirtle and Kangaskhan use Outrage on Charmander. While Bulbasaur had to make continued use of all the speed and agility he had to avoid Rhyhorn's constant rolling attacks, Nidoqueen stomped on the ground and roared out its name as several blasts of molten hot energy shot out of the ground under and around Squirtle, making it a necessity for the water type to also put his agility to use as he jumped and swerved around the blasts of raw power coming from beneath him. Charmander though was a little less fortunate due to the sheer speed at which the large Pokémon Kangaskhan appeared in front of him. Eyes glowing red as the normal type reared its arms back and then began slugging wildly at the smaller Pokémon. With all of his Pokémon now playing rapid, desperate defense, Ash knew he had to counter. Squirtle, withdraw into your shell and then use a rapid water pulse and bubble beam. Bulbasaur, use multiple leech seeds to try and slow Rhyhorn down, and Charmander, fight back with Rage and Fire Fang. His commands were well received and it started with Bulbasaur jumping away and then spouting out several small seeds all along the path that Rhyhorn was traveling through the office to get to him, leaving what were essentially tiny little earth and land mines to snare the larger Pokémon. Charmander, on the other hand, took a more offensive approach and started battling back, toe-to-toe, with Kangaskhan. Using a combination of rage, which pumped up his little body and caused it to glow red, as well as his fangs to glow with bright flames as he used them to both bite and counter the bigger Pokémon's punches, as well as biting at its torso any time he had an opening. Squirtle, for his part, withdrew into his shell to increase his defensive power and also began firing multiple bursts of water and bubbles from the holes in his shell to fight back against the underground eruptions Nidoqueen had caused. Sadly though, he wasn't lucky enough to avoid them all and a blast came right up underneath of his shell, launching Squirtle high into the air towards the ceiling as it burned the sensitive underside of the water type's protective covering. This caused Squirtle to withdraw from his shell and cry out, which Nidoqueen took advantage of as the large Pokémon fired another burst of poison barbs at the turtle from down below. Barbs which struck their target head-on and made Squirtle fly back through the air with another cry of, "Squirt!" Rhyhorn also found a way around Bulbasaur's defensive measures and did this by getting a rolling start and then leaping directly over all of the leech seed pods that was keeping it from its target. Bulbasaur was obviously not ready for this and due to that, he took a full force hit straight in the face, knocking him skyward as well and actually into the ceiling itself, before he fell back to the ground and managed to use his vines to break his fall somewhat so he could land, albeit unsteadily, on his feet. As for Charmander, his fortunes didn't appear to be improving much either, and this was due to the fact that his body was already tired from having battled so much prior, even with Bulbasaur's earlier energy boost via Ingrain. Because of this and also because the sheer power of his foe was so much greater, the smaller fire type began losing ground, rapidly. Culminating in Charmander sustaining several bruising blows right in his gut before a dizzying one smashed into his face and sent him rolling across the floor like a piece of paper. Ash knew his Pokémon were in trouble, but even still, he refused to give up. And it was obvious they were not either as all three stood back up again, leading Giovanni to chuckle darkly. "You just don't learn, do you? Fine, I'll teach you the importance of staying down when facing a superior opponent." Without giving another command, all three of his Pokémon rushed forward again to execute their own attacks, although so did Ash's. Nonplussed that they were facing such vastly overpowered opponents and instead being steadfastly committed to fighting to the bitter end. Amazingly enough, this grid allowed Bulbasaur to actually smash heads against Rhyhorn, the two of them meeting in the middle of the room and fighting for dominance as the two Pokémon who were greatly varied in size and weight fought back and forth. Bull. Bah. The grass type grunted out as he scrunched his face up and narrowed his eyes while butting his head against Rhyhorn's. RHY. The other quadruped Pokémon snorted back as it pushed against the surprisingly strong and stout grass type's impressive defensive root. Squirtle found himself engaged in a dance of deadly combat with Nidoqueen. The water type hopping and dancing around each of the larger Pokémon's repeated double kicks and mega punches while countering by blowing bubble beam at it and slapping Nidoqueen across the face with his strong tail. Charmander and Kangaskhan were also involved in a fierce slugging match. The fire type was using a combo of Fire Fang, Ember, Flamethrower and small bursts of smokescreen to the face in order to both block, as well as counter Kangaskhan's repeated double hits, as well as dizzy and comet punches. For several long, grueling moments, Ash and Giovanni watched their Pokémon viciously wage all-out war against one another, not a single one giving an inch even when a blow was landed. Which, incredibly enough, Ash's Pokémon were succeeding at with marginally impressive results. HMPH. Giovanni grunted to himself. They're stronger than I thought. But even still. He waved his hand out in front of him, the Team Rocket leader now fully engaged in the current battle. All three of you. Turn up the power. I want you to turn all you have on those annoying little pipsqueaks. Don't you dare disappoint me, you swine. The brutal order from Giovanni, not to mention the promise of pain that would follow if they failed to listen, inspired Rhyhorn, Kangaskhan and Nidoqueen to turn up the power and intensity of their attacks. Unfortunately for Ash's quickly tiring Pokémon, whose impressive stamina still had its limits, they simply were incapable of keeping up. Even for all of their power, strength and harsh training, they were battling against not only vastly larger and more powerful Pokémon, but they were also already battle-weary, and on top of that, Bulbasaur, Squirtle and Charmander were still most likely far younger and less experienced than Giovanni's experienced fighters. This led to Bulbasaur finally losing the battle of strength as Rhyhorn overpowered him with a standing takedown attack and sent the grass type tumbling back across the floor. Squirtle too was overpowered, Nidoqueen finally landing a Mega Punch after he jumped in the wrong direction. An attack that was followed by the larger Pokémon hitting him in the stomach again, this time so hard the blow actually cracked Squirtle's undershell, the water type's eyes glazing over in the process, and sent him straight into the ground with a gasp. Nidoqueen followed this up by stomping on Squirtle's cracked shell with a final downward double kick, its focus now on crushing the life out of the water type as Squirtle grunted and gasped in agonizing pain. Charmander too lost his fight against Kangaskhan when sheer exhaustion set in. This led the bigger Pokémon to brutalizing him with several hard, fast dizzy, Mega and Comet punches, each one causing spittle to leave Charmander's mouth as he cried out in pain before he dropped to the ground. Kangaskhan then bent down and lifted Charmander high into the air in both hands and roared in victory. Ash, feeling helpless and at a loss to help his Pokémon against such superiorly overpowered opponents, clenched his fists and gritted his teeth tightly together. Seeing this, Giovanni cackled. Now do you see, boy? It doesn't matter how you struggle or what you do, you could never stand up against the power and sheer might of Team Rocket. And now I'm going to show you the error of your ways. The last mistake you ever made was thinking you could challenge me. He then commanded loudly, finish them. Their commands given, Nidoqueen gave a hard kick to Squirtle's body and sent him flying back into Bulbasaur across the floor, followed by Kangaskhan doing the same to Charmander. Leaving the three small Pokémon laying in a twitching, bruised and beaten pile on the ground. Standing shoulder to shoulder, all three Pokémon then charged up the final attacks Giovanni gave them. Rhyhorn, Kangaskhan, Nidoqueen. He lifted his hand high into the air as Nidoqueen and Kangaskhan charged up identical balls of orange energy in their mouths, all while Rhyhorn formed several glowing jagged rocks above and around its body. Use Hyper Beam and Stone Edge. At the same time, they launched their attacks, all three game-ending moves heading towards Ash's downed Pokémon and hitting with an impact that washed the whole office in bright light and caused it, as well as the floors above, to shake and tremble. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Brock looked down as he felt the intense trembling beneath his feet. Man, it sounds like someone is having just as hard of a time as I've been having. He thought to himself as he looked back up again and gritted his teeth. In front of him was his Onyx, the rock type looking badly beaten up and well past being on its last legs due to the absolute drubbing they had been receiving all battle. Looking past his exhausted Pokémon to their opponent, Brock took stock of the ones responsible for giving them such a hard time. Riken was standing almost all the way across the length of the devastated second floor, his beefy arms crossed under his chest and his face as grizzled and impassive as ever. In front of him was his Raiden. Pokémon looking exactly like Trainer as it stood like an immovable object of raw power amongst the rubble of a shattered and destroyed office. The dual-type Pokémon had only the faintest of scratches and scuff marks on its toughened, plaited hide, courtesy of Onix's valiant, never-ending fighting spirit that allowed him to cause that minor damage in the first place. As he took in his unfazed foe and the Pokémon they had been battling against who was showing absolutely no signs of fatigue, Brock's false persona, Blue, sweated down his neck for what felt like the millionth time in the battle so far. This just isn't possible, he thought to himself again. We've been battling with all we have this whole time and that Raiden doesn't even seem close to falling over yet. His eyes drifted to Onix's weary form. Onix has been fighting incredibly all battle and he's landed some good attacks, but it's just not enough. Those two are so far above our levels we can't even match them. And I can tell, he's been brave but Onix can't handle much more. At that moment, Brock was faced with a crossroads that left his mind reeling. What do? We can't beat them, that's obvious. But we've spent so much time battling this guy and his Raiden. I have no idea what's happened with Misty, Giselle or Ash. He focused ahead again. All I do know for a fact is that we can't lose, we can't. The others are depending on us and I can't let them down. But what do? One more attack from that Raiden and Onix is done for, I can see it. But then, Brock's mind continued to play over every conceivable scenario he could think of to get out of their current predicament, but each one seemed just as unlikely as the next.